Hello, Finn.
Hello.
You are a philosophical practitioner, and moreover, you are a professor of philosophical practice at the University of Aalborg in northern Denmark. And since you practice various formats of philosophical practice, let me ask you this question. What for you are the main ideas, the main principles, the heart of philosophical practice?
I like the heart of philosophical practice. For me, at least, it is, first of all, what Plato already said, that to philosophize, to really going into a philosophizing, has to do with beginning in a wonderment, deeply fundamental wonderment, Taumensein. But not just to begin in wonder, but also to be led by wonder and to end in wonder. And that's fundamental. So the phenomenology of wonderment, is very important for me, as in contrast to the phenomenology of curiosity or the phenomenology of an analytical inquirement or conceptualizing. Wonderment is something else. It's more connected to being in an ontological relation with the world, as opposed to being in only an epistemological, conceptualized grasp of the world. So the notion of wonderment, especially not just the person being in wonder, but the people who are together. It could be a group, it could be one-to-one, but that there may arise a kind of event, which I call the event of a community of wonder, a community of wonder. And that is extremely important for me, because if the practitioner, the facilitator, is not also himself or herself in a wonderment, well, it's not really going in the right direction, so to speak. We are not there. We're not standing then in the openness. We are not standing then in a fundamentally vulnerability. And then if we are not in this fundamental vulnerability, we will not be enough open to receive the call of the lived experience. So that's another thing. So to get into a wonderment, I think we have to, first of all, be touched by something. We have to be in contact with not reality in an empirical sense, but life as such, or the phenomenon as such. So when I'm more theoretical, talking about philosophical practice is really a fundamentally existentially phenomenological and hermeneutical process, and Socratic dialectical. So there's different momentums in a philosophical practice, as I understand it. And when I try to get people into this move towards wonderment, I try to always start get them to start from a lived experience. So, for instance, if the question is, what is really love? What is it? So instead of going into a conceptualized, what do you think about it? No, we start from a lived experience. How does it feel? Yes, but I'm not going into a psychological introspection of how does it feel but much more like, give me an example. Just give me an example from a lived experience from your own life where you felt that here I was in a loving relation, or I was loving something. How does it feel to be in such a situation? And by walking around it with the guest, the visitor, we slowly get into listening from the inner side of the word of love. What is the concept of the word of love? But we listen to it from the inner side, but not in a psychological sense, but a more existential sense.
So what kind of observations or things people may say in such a situation in your experience?
Well, it's typical. When I'm doing it, I could do it with nurses or whatever, teachers or professional. But for instance, a nurse, if we are going to talk about, they would like to come up with the question, what is a loving relation when I'm with the relatives of a dying patient, for instance? How do I connect? then they would, if they are going to describe the lived experience, then they will start typical by having a more outstanding, you stand up from outside and looking at it. And the words, the voice, the way of describing it is like more objective, But then I try to help them to no, you should just tell as if it was a telling, a story. And then they tell. And then I hear what they want to tell me about their lived experience of love. But then we are not there yet, because then we only hear the person's own wanting to point to something. What I want to and hope for in our dialogue is that we both will land in a wonderment about what is it that life in that situation, the voice of life in that situation would like us to see. So I'm not so interested in the person's particular lived experience as such. It's more like, what can this particular lived experience help us to see about this, the moment of, or the essence of love in this theme? How can we understand from the particular what the universal is in the particular?
How do you help them become, enter wonder as opposed to just being curious?
So the first step, I said there was 5 momentum. The first momentum is the phenomenological. I have to be in the lived experience. And being in the lived experience, then the second momentum would be to listen to, in a more hermeneutical, philosophical way, what might be the tacit assumptions, worldviews, or values which is taken for granted in the lived philosophy, in the lived experience. And there might be many themes, many assumptions, but then I ask them to focus. Philosophize more from the heart, in the sense that, okay, there's a lot of themes, but where is the heat of the moment? Which of these many assumptions is speaking to you mostly? And then you say, okay, this assumption is important, and then we dwell on this assumptions, and I ask more critical, humoristic, Socratic, in a Socratic way. I go around it, and then the person gets more and more wondrous about it. What is it really? I thought I knew what something was, and he or she becomes more silent in that way. So that's the finding. You could say that is about finding your personal existential or philosophical wonderment. The third momentum is, in my approach, is to say, okay, now we have a personal experience. That's important to find that in a phenomenological sense. Then I have a personal philosophical wonderment, and that's difficult to find that. But when you have it, okay, this is mine, But now we want to elevate it. Now we want to take the lived experience, the personal little lived experience, the personal little wonderment, and put it in what I call the cathedral. And the cathedral is like, whoa, now we are in the dialogue with the grand stories and the grand wonders of human mankind. So if the theme, or one of the wonderments around what is love has been, well, to be in love, it seems that in my lived experience has to do with what? A humbleness, for instance, being in a humble way. That has just been a tacit assumption when I'm talking about love. So now I will bring this, what is really humbleness? My personal wonderment into the cathedral, and then I will ask some of the great thinkers, and that shouldn't necessarily be philosophers. It could also be poets or whatever, and musicians. So when we are in the cathedral, we should move around with the big guys and girls and the big artists and so on in a way that is Socratic. Because if I just take a big story, I will be, how do you say that, easily persuaded, I will be taken away by this grand horizons. So it's important to have a counter story as well, to move or to navigate in that. So when you are in the third momentum, you will have help from the big stories, and that is a very important aspect as well. So the fourth level, or not level but momentum, then would be, okay, now we have been with the great ideals and horizons, but where are you in all these? Who and where are you in all those great thoughts? So the fourth momentum would be a kind of existential grounding. And when we go into that room, or in that momentum, I can bring in more what Pierre Hadot would call spiritual exercises, more silent, and some of your thinking as well. Some of your practices. I like that, but also more aesthetic approaches. So I loosen up a little bit from this more Socratic to bring in more aesthetics. So yeah, in the fifth momentum, then we try to connect to their daily life. The practice as nurses, being on a hospice, being on a hospital, whatever. But what does it mean to connect when you have been through a Socratic Bildung process, or there's one community of wonder? Well, there's different things. One thing is the insight, maybe a tacit kind of insight that you feel now you have about the topic. Well, you do not have a clear answer. What I hope to get through a Socratic dialogue is not a clear answer, but is a deeper wonderment. Because I deeply think, in a Gadamer sense, that if you are in a deep wonderment, you will also be more receptive to a deeper understanding that will arrive, which you cannot grasp in a methodological way, but you have to be open. So going away from Socratic practice, you might get answers because you are more open in life. But that's another. So that's one thing. The other thing is what I call the deed. What does it mean to... the Socratic dialogue can be a kind of pureness, or yeah, it can be a kind of frenetic experience, that you'll be better to have frenetic actions where you practice wisdom in more in tune with the situation or the relation you are in your daily life.
One last question about the practicalities. How long does usually the process usually take, and where does it take place?
Oh, that depends, really. It could be just a short exercise where they get a feeling of it, like when I do it with students or psychologists who want just to have a sense of it. But what I like, and where we get deeper into the things, is, for instance, when I do kind of Socratic phenomenological action research, which can be 2 or 3 years. And I've been doing research projects as that, where I am asked to go to a design school, where the question is, what could be the relation between wonderment and creativity? And then we work with these 5 momentums as a way of articulating more intuitive, tacit knowledge, and get into a community of wonderment around that, and then articulate what happens there. Or it could be, as I'm doing right now, a hospice, where I first work with wonder-based dialogues and reflection with the staff, with the priest, the psychologist, the nurses, and then after they have got a sense of it, they write about their stories, they tell the stories, and we they articulate some of their experience, and we have a wonderment around that. And we see how this kind of being in a wonderment also make them more open in the meeting with the relatives or the patient or themselves, when they have more existential, ethical questioning.
Well, that's fascinating, or rather I should say wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Finn.
Okay, thank you too.